Have you missed it? Like, do you kind of think, oh, I should have got in on Bitcoin?
I don't spend a lot
5 years ago.
Bitcoin.
And Bitcoin is something that certainly a lot of people think, is going to rise as an alternative currency.
The Australian Bitcoin Podcast, presented by HardBlock.
It's not a currency, it's not money. I don't understand it.
Hey, hello, welcome to the Australian Bitcoin Podcast presented by HardBlock, Australia's longest running Bitcoin-only exchange. My name is DJ, this is Mike, and we've got a very special guest with us today, Bayani, from the Australian Bitcoin industry body. Now, Mike and I, we both work at HardBlock. I'm head of education, Mike is head of customer support, and just in case you hadn't noticed, we're going to give the podcast a bit of a fresh coat of paint and a slightly new format as we continue through the tradition of being the best place to get your Bitcoin-focused news, takes, and insight, importantly, from an Australian perspective. Mike, how's it going, mate? Bayani, welcome.
Pretty good.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
No, it's awesome. This is DJ and Mike's second go around, and the first time we've had a guest on. And we're finding our feet. I think the first episode went pretty well. We've got some good numbers, and I think everyone enjoyed the intro, which I hope you picked the song. I don't know if you're out there with a keen ear, but there's actually two songs in the intro that are quintessentially Australian in origin, and answers on a postcard if you know those two songs. I tell you what, I'll give you 10,000 sats if you boost us on Fountain or whatever and let us know. So we're recording this on the 8th of May 2025. We're at block height 895,762. The current price of Bitcoin in US dollars is 99,250. We're on a bit of a tear. We're ripped up to 153,350K in Australian Pacific pesos. Mike, you have the median house price, capital cities, priced in dollars and Bitcoin.
Yeah, so the Australian median house price currently, we're sitting at $1,019,000, so just over $1 million in our median house prices in the capital cities.
Normal.
We're about 6.7 Bitcoin. 6.7 Bitcoin will buy your house, an average house in a capital city at the moment.
So that's actually gone up by $6,000 since we last spoke, and gone down in Bitcoin terms. That's incredible.
Yep, and I'll expect to just see that median house price number just keep creeping up, no matter what people think might be the outcome of the election. I think that we'll just keep seeing that number just creep up and up and up as we go.
I look forward to it. Bayani, is the cost of living in one of the world's most beautiful but also most expensive cities going up or down for you?
Well, being on a Bitcoin standard helps. So I think a lot of people out there are feeling the pinch. I think it's more than a pinch right now. It's an absolute thrashing. I think it's just going to get worse and worse. At least that's the word on the street.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, but if you attempt to do a household budget and try and forward plan, say the next 12 months, 6 months, it's kind of impossible, right? Like it gets really, really difficult to actually, hit that moving target because it's moving so damn quickly.
Yeah, and despite the rhetoric coming out of the politicians around the election on how they're going to tackle cost of living pressures, it's just one of those things where it's all talk and all bluster. But I think we're just going to see pain on that front. I can't really see any way out of this trend.
No, I don't know about you, but I'm just glad that I have discovered Bitcoin when I did. What about in terms of what you're seeing on the ground there in Sydney, though, Bayani? Do you get to have the kinds of conversations about the cost of living with the people that you want to have a conversation with, or do they mostly gloss over it and turn the sausage at the barbecue like that meme?
I think it's a bit of both. I think there are people out there that are willing to be vulnerable about their financial position, but I think there's a lot more people out there that are trying to hide the pain. I remember a stat a couple of years ago about the increase in credit card use month to month and the rate of default for that credit card use. And that was a couple of years ago where it was relatively getting a lot higher. I imagine, or I would expect, however, it's a lot worse now. And as cost of living continues to go up, credit cards are just becoming a band-aid that people are using rather than looking at actual solutions. Because the reality is most people don't have much of a solution. They've got their full-time job, they've got the kids to look after, they've got the daily routine that they've got to deal with, to try and then find out, well, how else do I get more income? The alternative is to go out on the risk curve with whatever disposable income. If you happen to have some, where do you allocate it? And if you're a young person, you might just be gambling away. Maybe that's a bit cynical, but you know they don't yet have the they often don't technically have the nous to go out there and look at the financial markets. And what are they being faced with when they go down that pathway? It's a complete shit show out there.
Yeah, and I mean, the thing is, most people can grok like a sports betting app way easier than a Bitcoin buying app, exchange, website, whatever it is. And I mean, we hear stories of people putting, food on credit, like DoorDash. I don't know if that's actually in Australia yet.
Yep, it is. Icon. Yeah, buy now, pay later. You can afterpay all your. You can afterpay your pizza.
Wow. So you can add fast food debt onto your student debt, onto your mortgage debt.
Mike's loving it.
Perhaps
thankfully, I never got into that world of, I'm not in that world of just summoning food from strangers to your door. I'm very happy to be self-reliant there and avoid, paying the exorbitant rates that you do for fast food nowadays with prices just creeping up, and then you're throwing your delivery fees on top of that. And rather than find a better way, people are just happy to just go deeper into debt, and these buy now, pay later platforms that are arising and taking hold everywhere.
Yeah,
I think it's a trade-off. It's a trade-off of convenience. People don't see the balance. All they see is the convenience of being able to trade. The money that's on the screen for a service. But that's what we get with the banking system, right? It used to be a matter where you would have to look at your wallet and see what you got in there, not necessarily, just tap and go and not having to think about the actual impact, the consequences.
Yeah, it's like that, it's the future me that has to deal with it. It's not me right now that has to. The me right now just wants a tasty burger delivered to me by a stranger. Future me will worry about paying for it and worry about taking on the debt to deal with it.
Over 4 weeks.
Yeah.
The future me of tomorrow over 4 weeks. Sounds like a Futurama meme. I mean, what they could do potentially is what AMP announced recently, where they announced a 10-year interest-only loan offer with no midterm assessment, providing customers with more choice, long-term flexibility, and greater control over their cash flow. So that's something. I mean, what are you guys' thoughts on just not only figuratively kicking this can down the road, but literally just changing the rules and be like, well, okay, let's just do a 10-year interest-only loan. That will, that'll ease the pressure.
Well, this is the end result of debt slavery, right? This is, a lot of decriers of our system will call it. They've always called it debt slavery. But we're now moving into levels of debt where you don't pay it off ever. You don't pay off the principal. You just keep up with the interest payments, and you will start, rather than getting an inheritance, passing down an inheritance, you pass on your debt to your progeny, who then have to just keep that keep pushing that millstone.
That's a goal, isn't it?
Everyone needs a goal. Everyone needs a purpose.
When they say they're living the dream, I don't know whose dream they're living, but they're living a dream.
Yeah, I'm just trying to bring up Santo over at BTC Club commented. He ran some numbers. He always does a really good job of running some numbers on that. So I'm just going to pull that up. Give me 1 second.
He did a good post talking about how it took us, was it 20 years or something, for our government to produce, what was it, $1 trillion of the money supply, M2 money, and then in the last 2 years, or I think it was year 2020 to 2022, we produced another we had another 700 billion to that money supply in just such a short period of time.
A commercial credit. Yep.
Yeah, and I think that trend will continue, especially now that we've got another 4 years of Labor to look forward to, who they're always happy to keep that money printer whirring to pay for their lovely policies and pledges that they make to everyone.
Well, I mean, they both are. I can't find that tweet by BTC Club, but he's definitely worth a follow if you're on X, if you're on Twitter. Just search Oz BTC Club, and he's always constantly running some numbers and giving good insight into what these things actually look like in real life. But speaking of the election, some lovely little segue there, Mike. We have, what was it, the worst government ever recorded over the last, say, 4 or 5 years, re-elected again because the opposition was just such trash.
Yeah, it was quite astounding just seeing these results come through. You know, it's the first time in 2 decades that we've had a prime minister secure a victory and have a second term. So, yeah, we haven't seen that since Howard, I think it was. And so, yeah, the results are interesting considering the last 4 years have not been great. You know, Australia had the largest fall of disposable income out of all the OECD nations. Australia had the biggest sharp fall compared to all those folks. And so the economic results were not good. And yet they had just a resounding victory. So it is a strange result.
I wouldn't classify it as resounding as much as Labor or Albanese has noted that they believe they have a mandate. If you look at the actual first preference votes for Labor, there's not much too different from the last election. So really their win came off the back of the Liberal National Party losing it for themselves insofar as the voters chose independents that were preferencing not them. So I don't think it's necessarily a first preference vote that's won it for Labor.
Sure.
But I think the aggregate is that people were sold on an idea of what the future could be, rather than, I think, perhaps the messaging of the Liberal National Party of what the last 4 years were, or the last 3 years were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, you're right. It is interesting to see. I think they only got 32% of the vote. Literally 32% of the vote gets you a strong victory. It's very strange, isn't it? It's just obviously it's the way the system is set up, but it still doesn't sit right. You know, logic doesn't dictate 32% gives you such a solid victory.
It wouldn't in a first preferential sense, but I was having a discussion with somebody else the other day about preferential voting. If you had only 2 parties, then that would make more sense. But I think it would be fair to say you'd want a government that is more representative of the overall spirit of the nation. So if the spirit of those independents or the minor parties were left or right either way, I think that I would much prefer see that be brought to the front through that preferential voting, rather than necessarily simply saying, I guess a bit of a first past the post on a certain threshold, when you could have 30%, somebody win 30%, but 70% of the nation not be represented by that 30%. I think I'd rather see better representation through the government.
Yeah, so we definitely saw the effect of the Liberal Party hemorrhaging a lot of attention and votes to these freedom parties, and the end result, which a lot of people did predict, was that you're basically just splitting hairs. You're casting your votes over a the whole nation, and that results in Labor just coming in with its clean sweep, despite only that 32% of votes. So yeah, hopefully it sends Liberals a message that they need to really, really rethink what they're doing.
So
If you happen to listen to the, well, if you happen to have watched, as I happen to have done, the ABC coverage of it, the Liberal guy, the James McGrath, I think his name was, he was talking to the fact that they'd have to rethink their policies. A lot of the policies came off the back of Angus Taylor, allegedly. And so to what degree, certainly ABIB could look at engaging with the Liberal Party in any short-term way is sort of thrown out the window until they get their act together and sort of work out what they want to be able to represent for the next 3 years in opposition. Yeah, I think they have a lot of soul searching to do.
So I didn't realize that it was 32. Did you say 32%?
Yeah.
So if you think of that, I don't know if you've seen that democracy meme where there's like 4 dudes beating up on one guy, and they all sort of are agreeing, like the majority is in agreement. It's basically like one of those guys beating up on the others, and the other 3 are just standing by watching.
Yeah,
It's pretty gross.
Yep. It's the system we've got. We can talk about what the election results sort of mean for Bitcoiners, for Australian Bitcoiners, and very keen to get your perspective on that, Bayani. Maybe before we delve into that though, maybe give us a really brief introduction on ABIB, Australian Bitcoin Industry Body, and sort of talk, for any listeners that are not familiar with you and your work and what the industry body does, and then we'll have some comments on what these election results actually might mean for Bitcoin policy and Bitcoiners.
Sure. So I'm currently the CEO. We have a board independent of myself that oversees the overall running of the Australian Bitcoin Industry Body. So our goal is to be the voice of the Bitcoin industry here in Australia. So primarily looking to represent the likes of HardBlock and our other Bitcoin-only exchanges here in Australia, separate to the crypto exchanges in Australia. We certainly don't speak on their behalf or don't seek to be a voice for them. That's for them to work out on their own terms. But we do that through a range of different actions, engaging with policymakers, media, and supporting the grassroots activism of local meetups. Really trying to ensure that the public is aware of the local areas of local meetups that are around them, that they can, they don't have to be a Bitcoiner coming to fruition in isolation, but really that they can go speak to Bitcoin and that there are other people that they can speak to about Bitcoin. So yeah, but just a bit of a brief overview.
Awesome. And off the back of these election results that have just come through, obviously Labor's come in with quite a resounding victory. What's your sort of very high level perspective on what that might mean for Bitcoin policy in Australia in general, maybe your interactions with the Labor Party, if you think that you'll even be able to have interactions with them? I know it's notoriously difficult to even get your foot in the door sometimes to talk to some of these pollies. So yeah, maybe just your 2 cents on that high level, what you think is next for the Bitcoin industry as a result of this election.
I think there's at least 2 sort of areas to look at. It's a federal and state level. From a federal level, we've actually had inbound outreach from the Labor Party about Bitcoin to the Australian Bitcoin Industry Body. And I think that might come to as a surprise, but I think that if a politician is going about doing their due diligence and understanding a little bit more about what's out there, I don't think we should be too surprised. I am a little surprised, however, that the Liberal National Party hasn't played a larger role in engaging with us, given that I would expect that there is a more natural overlap, more intuitive overlap with ideology. So that's a little disappointing, to be honest. But given that the ALP have sought us out, we've engaged with them. One of our other members, Michael Dunworth, and myself went up and saw Jerome Laxall. We gave him a very high level overview of what the industry overall was experiencing and also consumers, like the Australian public, what they're having to deal with the existing banking system. And so that's been quite fruitful in that. After that, Jerome reached out and asked if he had some questions for the RBA, and he was gracious enough to put those questions to Michelle Bullock, the governor of the RBA, in a RBA review earlier this year. So look, I'm optimistic about some potential movement forward. I think that it really is playing the long game in terms of helping not just the ALP, but across the political spectrum, but to talk to the ALP specifically, helping the ALP understand how Bitcoin can align and help them achieve their agenda, and ensuring that we're advocating for a regulatory space that doesn't get in the way of Bitcoin. I don't think it's a matter of necessarily saying that we want special treatment per se. What we don't want is commercial interests preventing competition in a global monetary system.
Sure. Yeah, something that crosses my mind is, you see this election obviously went to Labor. Canada just had their federal election that went to their Liberals, who, not to get confused, their Liberals are basically our Labor. They're their left-wing major party. And they had a not as drastic a victory as the Labor Party here, but they had a good victory, an unexpected victory as well. The right-wing party in Canada was pegged to win, but then suddenly took a nosedive off the back of a bit of resurgence of Canadian nationalism through Trump's threats to annex or bring Canada in as a 51st state or whatever. Yeah. But anyway, the reason I bring that up is the Trump administration is obviously going very pro crypto, and a lot of governments now that seem to be campaigning off the back of being a bit anti-Trump, a bit anti-right wing, anti-nationalist, and so there's a fear that the Labor Party, now that they've got the solid victory, will play up to their voter base of being anti-Trump, and because Trump is pro-crypto, they should also be anti-crypto. And I think that we have seen a little bit of that start to play out in these other countries that have just had these elections. Do you see that potentially happening here, where our government keeps this harsh stance up against Trump and his crypto-friendly policies and goes anti-crypto off the back of this sentiment?
No. I think what we've got here is a situation where, to consider crypto specifically, you have an industry that is definitely advocating for a pro-crypto space. You've got, on the Liberal side of things, you've got Senator Andrew Bragg, who has been quite vocal about being pro-crypto. From ABID's perspective, it's trying to seek out those that are more specific about their support around Bitcoin, and developing those, I suppose, contacts and assets within those parties. It's definitely something where driving the division between Bitcoin and crypto is quite critical, ensuring that the Bitcoin baby is not thrown into the crypto bathwater. And that's often been the case, certainly in reporting, the conflation between the two. But I think through persistence, we'll get to a stage where persistence in education. Ultimately, what I see is Bitcoin's adoption really just comes down to individual education. And whilst it's quite easy to point to this nebulous group of people as this party or that party or the media, they are fundamentally still individuals. And I think over time, speaking to any individual, if you're able to identify their pain points, they may come to understand why they as an individual want Bitcoin, and then go down that rabbit hole themselves. So I don't try to speak to a party per se, whilst I might look to frame things within their policy framework or what they're looking to achieve. It really is just a matter of that understanding what that individual understands about the current state of things and speaking to that. I think meeting people where they're at rather than trying to tear them through where we want them to be, is a more effective means of onboarding people to the concept of Bitcoin.
Yeah, totally. I think meeting people where they are is one of the easiest and best ways you can get to orange pill someone, particularly if it comes from a person that they have a bit of reverence for or respect, or you're just not beating them over the head with it. I mean, we have a joke going around. We produced this book called Easy Bitcoin, Learn Bitcoin, the basics of Bitcoin in 10 minutes or less, which you can actually download off our website, which I'll put a link in the show notes. But I know I sent you a couple of copies of this, Bayani, and you've enjoyed these books. I had a joke with the guys when we launched them at Bitcoin Alive back in March that if we had the resources like the JWs do, we could actually hit the streets and go around and knock on people's doors and tell them the good news, so to speak. But you couldn't meet anyone more where they are at their front door.
No, it definitely does feel like sometimes it is a level of evangelism that we're doing, and it's probably certainly in the framing of things, selling the concept of hope is a tried and true method of people coming to understand things. But I think that the people need to understand what the system is that they're currently living in first, or at least acknowledging some of the shortfalls of the existing system.
One of the things that I worry about with regards to that, just on that, there was a lot of energy online. It's kind of hard to gauge just how much that bleeds out into the real world, but there was a lot of energy, particularly on Twitter, amongst certain accounts, and again, could have been in a bubble. But there's a fella called Morgan Cox who made a bit of a name for himself by appearing on Q&A, and he's getting more and more followers, and more people are listening to, I guess, what he has to say. And he's kind of become the poster boy, I suppose, for the cost of living crisis, unaffordable housing, all of this sort of stuff. And he's lent into it. Fair play to him. When I've tried to engage with him, either via Discovering Bitcoin or HardBlock account, I'm always met with resistance in regards to he's still thinking it like it's an investment. He's still thinking it like it requires, and it does, an extra amount of money that you sort of go without that week in order to quote unquote invest in it. And it's that changing of the frame from an investment vehicle to a savings vehicle for that everyday person. Because to be honest, I think in the last 5 years, as you mentioned, Mike, the cost of living is going up and up and up. And that cache of disposable income that people actually have available to even look around after they've touched the stove, or they keep touching the stove and think, well, how do I fix this problem? But they just don't have any spare coin to even consider something like that. So even when you give stats of the price of a cup of coffee or a case of Coopers continuing to fall under a Bitcoin standard, it doesn't seem to resonate as much as I thought it might, and it might have perhaps, say, 5 years ago.
Yeah, well, the thing that we need to keep in mind is that, end of the day, storing your wealth in anything other than shelter and basics, food, that sort of thing, is kind of a luxury. It's like it is like a starkly first world luxury, having an excess that you can then put away for the future. And it is important to be doing that for preparing for winter and getting ready for rainy days and that sort of thing. But the reality is there are a huge section of the population that just don't have that wiggle room to start with. They're just they're living day to day. They've just got their expenses that they're more and more struggling to pay for, and so in their mind it's hard for them to broach, well, how can I then spend even less and put some aside for Bitcoin? And that's where I guess the message might turn more towards, well, just the nature of fiat currency is creating these perverse incentives in our economy that is causing prices to rise, wages are stagnating, and it becomes more like just a traditional discussion of economics rather than referring specifically to Bitcoin, just because they might have that initial reaction as they're putting up barriers as soon as they're thinking investment rather than just living day to day.
I think it's probably more the point that most people in that situation don't even consider investments. They don't talk in terms of store of wealth. The types of conversations that typically happen around wealth creation or preservation are typically held but within families at a dinner table where you already have an existing some type of generational wealth to pass down. Um, the reality is that a good 25% of Australians don't even have $10,000 in their account. I think 15% don't have $1,000 in their account. So what does that mean for people, yes, living day to day, but actually being able to save, not just for a rainy day, but also for their future? And I suppose, what I'm glad to see is that more individuals that don't have access to, say, personal savings are looking at other pots of wealth that they can look at, go, well, hang on, I can't get access to, say, my superannuation until preservation age. This is what I'm going to allocate to save. This is how I'm going to buy Bitcoin. This is how I'm going to actually retire when I'm on a good wicket. Because that's really the only type of value, and it's forced savings. There's 12% forced savings in people's wages, and now you can sit there and go, okay, well, I'll let a retail fund take 8 to 12% a year, maybe get me 8 to 12% a year on average, but really they're just treading water. In terms of an investment sense, they're not really outpacing the monetary supply. So in terms of purchasing power, not just dollar value, but purchasing power, I think that's probably a more salient way to consider the valuation of Bitcoin, not in dollar terms, because at some point, not even at some point, it becomes this spectrum where to talk about Bitcoin in dollar terms is so useless because it is so worthless.
You mentioned in there super. I've got one more sort of topic off the back of the election results that we can talk about, and then we can move on to hopefully a more interesting topic than Australian politics.
It's pretty important. Look,
it's important. Yeah, you're right. It's important, but at the same time, we don't want to bore everyone to death. You mentioned superannuation. So one of Labor's pledges during the election, run up to the election, was them looking at taxing super balances over $3 million. And so that's obviously resonated quite well particularly with their voter base. Tax the rich, blah, blah, blah. Go for it, do it. But the catch to it, which I don't think many people have worked out yet, and it's only just starting to make the rounds in the news now, is in addition to these rules to tax balances over 3 million, they're also talking about taxing of unrealized capital gain in super accounts. And so that obviously impacts on people holding Bitcoin in their super. And then it even goes as far as they're leaving it particularly open and a bit vague and a bit ambiguous so that they can make further changes. They're even talking about taxing the capital gain on your family home, which is quite astounding when you really think about it. So what are your guys' thoughts on that? Taxing of unrealized gains for super.
Capital flight.
Yeah.
We saw that in Norway, right?
There's a couple of things on that. In terms of Div 296, the superannuation unrealized gains tax, I think it's found support because it only affects about 80,000 Australians currently, but it's not indexed. And to, I suppose, every Bitcoiner's dismay, and perhaps maybe not sort of realizing it, a lot of Bitcoiners now are still considering their wealth in today's dollars. They're not looking at their wealth within their self-managed super fund in what it could be in, say, 10, 20, 30 years' time at preservation age, or even lead up to with a unrealized gains tax. Certainly, to me, it disincentivizes myself to contribute more to my super. And I think that it's given that Labor already has the majority. I think it's likely to go through. That's the short end of the stick is that. I don't think there's enough people there that have an actual invested interest to kick up a stink enough about it. I think what you're going to sort of see, however, are the knock-on effects of that, insofar as farmers that have their homes, the farmers that have their farms, their property in their self-managed super fund, having to get sold to pay unrealized gains and then having to incur a realized gain to be able to do so. It's absolute madness. And this has been brought up in the hearings around this. So if for anyone who is interested, Div 296, there are records about the hearings that we can certainly go through to see where these types of issues have been raised, and it's getting quite difficult for them to try and reconcile. To me, it seems like if Labor were to try and bring something in, they would have to really reconsider how they're looking to implement such a strategy if they're actually looking to try and impose some type of tax to that mechanism, because they really haven't reconciled those problems.
My understanding was that the bill was already passed last month, and now they're just going through the details.
Yeah, sorry. At the time when I was reading them, at that stage it was still going through it. But
my mind
review how they're doing it and make some amendments before they really implement it. But that would probably be a good idea.
My mind always goes to, I always like to explore the more conspiratorial side of stories, and I can't help but think that this is setting the stage for the government to be able to, well, maybe not the government, maybe the government's friends and lobby groups, to have this mechanism where these small individual farmlands can be almost, they're almost forced to sell them to pay for to put food on the table, kind of like, because they're going through that right now in the UK, but they're doing it through more like green policy agendas and this sort of thing. Whereas here, they're just going to make it, your farmland is worth X amount. It's under your super. You've got this unrealized gain that you need to pay. Oh, you can't pay it? All right, sell your farm. Mm-hmm. And then it gets gobbled up by the big multinational farming companies that just keep growing their areas of control over our food supply and primary production. It seems like they're setting the stage for like land appropriations, but no, we're not seizing it. You're just forced to give it up because you can't afford to live otherwise.
At least in 1997, when the Melbourne airport were compulsory acquiring the Kerrigan residents, they had the common decency to just tell them straight up, this is what we're going to do. We kind of made a film about this, and I feel like as much as Australians are painted as laconic and, she'll be right, mate, and blah, 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 I think if it was to come to the crunch, a lot of people would push back and advocate for civil disobedience, effectively, and just non-compliance, just civil non-compliance. Just stop doing whatever they want you to do, because, like, what are they going to do? Rubber bullets?
Can't arrest all of us. They can try.
The public, as it stands, doesn't take the time to understand what money is.
Yeah.
And it's something they use every day. To them think that we're going to galvanize around something that doesn't affect somebody at that time. Yeah, I just don't see it. I mean, maybe it's cynical.
Well, what we should do... I
kind of think incentives drive the actions.
So the heat on the stove is getting turned up, and a lot of people will touch it. And perhaps at all Bitcoin meetups, we don't make it compulsory because we can't do that, and we are completely against coercion. But if you could voluntarily have a screening of the castle alongside of your Bitcoin talks, then we could sort of generate a little bit of buzz and galvanizing some of that support, because we've been through this before, and I don't know, like, as far as I'm concerned, my take on it, it's pretty left side of the bell curve. Just contact Katie the Russian, get Plan B passport, and leave as best as I can. Like, I just don't have time for those sorts of communistic games, and I just won't tolerate them. So,
Yeah, look, it's certainly well worth considering your options now rather than later. A lot of people leave their their tax considerations to well beyond when they really should be looking at it. Look at them now.
You're looking for a hassle-free way to buy Bitcoin in Australia? HardBlock makes it easy. As Australia's longest-running Bitcoin-only exchange, their mission is to help Australians simply and easily buy Bitcoin and take it into self-custody. There are no deposit or trading fees, just a clear 2.4% spread. That covers operating costs, so you always know exactly what you're paying. Withdrawals are just $1.18 or as low as 400 sats with AutoSend. There are no hidden charges, no surprises, just a fast, reliable, and easy way to stack sats with total transparency. Get started today at hardblock.com.au. Bitcoin made easy for Aussies.
Let's pivot real quick to the controversy of the last 2 weeks. Everyone on Twitter has been, I say everyone, that's painting with the broadest brush I could probably find, but the op return controversy. I am completely left side of the bell curve here. I defer to people on Nostr and Twitter X, way more than me having an independent thought about this. But I will say that if once you could explain it to us, Mike. I have an opinion, but I'd like you to just give us a little bit of a 101 skinny of what this controversy is if you've been living under a rock.
Sure. So I'll do my best. Again, it's probably my first major foray into looking into more of the policy side of things. And I think that might be the case for quite a few Bitcoiners where they've just been happy to, be orange pilled and orange pill others, and they've not really looked too much into the governance that goes into the protocol itself. And this event seems to have triggered a lot of Bitcoiners to actually get involved in the debates that happen around Bitcoin policy changes. So anyway, to get into the weeds of this particular op return controversy, basically one of the contributors to Bitcoin Core issued a pull request to essentially remove the cap on op returns. So op returns, it's basically a part, for anyone that's not aware of what an op return is, think of it like it's like almost attaching a sticky note to a Bitcoin transaction. So you can, you make a Bitcoin transaction, there's various inputs and outputs, but you can attach a sticky note to that transaction with some additional code or text or characters or data. Data is probably the best way. Some extra data that just kind of gets appended onto that transaction. Right now, it's quite limited. I think it's 40 bytes. I think 40 bytes is the current cap. So it's very, very small amount of data. And the proposal is to remove that cap and basically let people put more data onto sort of appended onto their Bitcoin transactions. And so that's caused a rift in various contributors and commentators. You can see plenty of people stating their case one way or the other on Twitter. It's always good to see people getting a bit aggro on there. It's always fun to watch, fun to read some of people's takes on things. But generally, people are falling onto one or two sides. One side is we should do it because it's cleaning up the code. People are already finding lots of different ways around putting data on the blockchain. A lot of people refer to it as spam. Putting monkey JPEGs or whatever onto Bitcoin using things like runes and inscriptions and all this sort of stuff. Those methods are necessary because of this limit on op return. So some proponents are saying, look, people are doing this anyway, so let's just remove this cap. And op return is, in theory, it's a cleaner way to do it, because some of these other ways to force data on the blockchain can result in unspendable outputs. And so their idea is that if we just let people use op return for this purpose, then it'll be cleaner. That's generally their case. And obviously I'm probably pissing off a lot of people by saying it in such a crass way. If you really want to dig into it, go and have a look at Twitter and have a look at the dumpster fire of people arguing about it. Now, on the other side are people that are saying, no, Bitcoin's purpose is it's money. It's not a digital repository for people to be forever minting their monkey JPEGs onto the blockchain forever, or whatever other data that they want, or spam that they want to put on the blockchain. It's not, its primary purpose is not a data repository. It's money. And so we should not be rolling out the red carpet and making it easier for people to put such data on the blockchain. And so there's been a bit of a debate back and forth on the pull request. It is interesting if you want to open it up and have a read about the comments there. And you can see there is, while there is a decent amount of support for removing this cap on op return size, it does appear that the majority of commentators are for keeping that limit on there. So there is definitely a slant towards not accepting this pull request. And the controversy also comes back to the fact that this is affecting Bitcoin Core, which a lot of people that run nodes will just run Bitcoin Core. And this is basically changing the almost default for someone spinning up a node. They'll install Bitcoin Core, they'll start running that, and they won't really understand the tweaks that they could make to their setup or alternate implementations. And so that's why this is creating so much controversy, because it's basically forcing the will of a certain number of people involved onto everyone that would run that software. So it's a bit all over the place there. It's a bit of a complicated topic, but yeah, it really comes down to what's your thoughts on spam on the network? Is it good? Is it bad? And people are happy to voice their side.
Yeah, well, Bayani, maybe you could give us a bit of your intake, your insight.
I think the way that I think you're absolutely right. It's a complex topic, because I think a lot of people are talking across each other in terms of their perspective. Some people are talking from a technical perspective in what is cleaner, and then some are talking about from an ideological perspective and what they as individuals want to see in the Bitcoin on the time chain. So I think my personal position is that, not having a technical understanding, I'm willing to gather more information about it. In the sense of, I'd rather have a better understanding about the pros and cons of each, and understand why it might. What are the benefits of removing it? What are the benefits of keeping it? Both on the short term and long term. Because I have heard or seen the argument made that, if they do it this way, like you said, they already have methods of putting this data or connecting it to the blockchain in some way, through rooms, etc. And by facilitating it through op return, should remove additional bloat to the blockchain. So there is I think, from a perspective of what can go onto the blockchain, I think that's a very different argument for why you would change the limit on a technical basis, if the considerations is around the cost to do so. Because in the discussions around why you would do it that way, it is it removes the bloat, from what I understand, but it does mean that they are still affected by the same transaction fees. So they would still be in the same market to include transactions as everybody else. And so whilst in the short term, it might make it easier per se to do it, it may very well mean that at some point, as Bitcoin becomes quite abundant as a monetary system, that type of activity would be priced out of the blockchain. And so I have, I guess, a weak opinion, weakly held, and I'm quite happy to hold both concepts in my head and consider them. I still consider Bitcoin to be a monetary system, not a database for JPEGs. But And I think that's important that we try and ensure that the function of that is about maintaining or moving towards that that direction. If that means part of that results in making it easier to put monkey JPEGs in for the short term, that short-term gain, short-term loss might result in a long-term gain.
Right.
Yes. So just before I sort of comment on that, just a correction. Before I said 40 bytes, the opera turn limit is currently 80 bytes. Yeah. So sorry, I made a mistake there. There are advocates actually want to bring it down to 40 bytes. That's where I got confused.
It was 40. I think it got bumped to 80.
Yeah. So anyway, right now it's 80 bytes. But I agree with you. I think that it's kind of irrelevant which side you fall on. I think that you're right in that it is a problem that will eventually resolve itself in the fee market. I think that over time, as Bitcoin network activity increases, the cost to make transactions just to put like a monkey JPEG or whatever data on the blockchain should get priced out by genuine economic activity between companies, between countries, between high net worth individuals and Bitcoiners just transacting and using the network for its original purpose should basically crowd out the relative cost of putting arbitrary data on the blockchain.
I worry about that word "should" though, Mike. You know, we talk about unintended consequences, and so my left side of the bell curve take is effectively the opening line or the first sentence in the Bitcoin white paper is peer-to-peer electronic cash, and it is a monetary system, and this is the whole reason effectively why we're in it. Yeah, we come for number go up, but then we realize it has all these other benefits that you don't necessarily see until you do a little bit of deep research and you start diving into economics and understanding all of those sorts of things. And effectively, Bitcoin at its core, no pun intended, is a monetary phenomenon, and that we should honor that and maintain that. And look, whether or not it should or it might or it could, I wonder, is this a similar thing to what happened with Taproot, a few years back? And everyone was signaling, yep, this is a good thing. And then all of a sudden, we've got the Taproot wizards and the whole chain is getting spammed and all the rest of it. I just think, like, for what it's worth, I'm still not necessarily down the ossifying path, but I just think this is all the things we talked about at the front of this podcast with regards to unrealized capital gains and shit like that, to disrupt the beauty and the elegance of the engineering, the economic engineering of Bitcoin, to disrupt it with value is subjective, but just things that are outside of that peer-to-peer electronic cash realm is it's sort of just flirting with things that are effectively unnecessary, in my opinion.
And that's kind of the phenomenon you're touching on there is kind of the product of the fact that with Bitcoin, we've got this interface we've got like engineers and developers that are in it for the technology. Then we've got economists and people that are economically minded and thinking of it as a pure monetary system. And then, so you've got these two groups. Then you've also got your sort of visionary philosopher types that are offering their two sats as well. And a lot of people are quick to point out that, Satoshi himself put in a inscription into the Genesis block, which was, the comment on the central banks on brink of
in there
whatever.
As well. In one of the first instances, there was some sort of gambling element to it.
Yeah. So it's this interface between engineering minded people, economically minded people, and philosophically minded people that are is sharing their opinions on this sort of situation. It's hard to say. It's almost impossible to say what the outcome is going to be, what the best path is. I don't really know, and I don't see really how this ends. I don't think there's been enough negotiation to reach any kind of consensus yet. What do you think the outcome might be, Bayani?
In terms of that consensus that you mentioned, the concept of rough consensus I think that it's important to note that what we've seen is a lot of talk on X, right? And that's where a lot of people are finding out about it. To what degree those people were informed about their opinions or merely parroting what their favorite influencer has said is another story. And I think that's an important consideration. And that's why I would much rather defer my not hand off my opinion to them, but I'd rather get some information from people that know and are technical about why they're looking to change those parameters, and also consider from the economic perspective what those people consider to be the economic outcomes. What should the economic outcome be of changing that parameter? What are what would be the unintended consequences? If it is a matter of reducing blockchain bloat by changing the mechanism to something that is cheaper for them to do so, and still ensures that there's some longevity for a Bitcoin node to be run at a home, I think that's an important consideration, because if we don't do something, then it may result in a greater bloat, greater difficulty for access to run a node. It does increase that cost. So yeah, it's sort of, I kind of expect that they will remove the limit, and I would hope that as a result that the fee market would decide what goes on the network as it currently does. What we're seeing is there's 8 billion people in this world, and very few of us are actively using Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, largely store values, certainly here in Australia. That's not necessarily the case overseas, right? But as more and more individuals and businesses and nation states start to use Bitcoin as a settlement layer, that demand for block space is going to ramp up. And so too will that space be soaked up with data. And I would, for one, prefer to see it be filled with monetary information than monkey check bags.
Yeah, no, I fully agree with you, and I do think we will probably see the cap get removed. I just hope that we can quickly move on and the conversation turns to more robust ways to mitigate spam on the network. Not necessarily through this pathway, but through some other means. Obviously, I wouldn't really have any clout to claim how we might go about that, but ultimately we're here for a monetary system. It should be a monetary system. It should not be a data repository. So my opinion is firmly one of, let's work out how we can bring it back to just being a monetary system and not a data repository. And maybe just to move on to our next sort of thing we can talk about is, this does serve to be a bit of a distraction. And some people out there have kind of pointed out that, the outcome of this is quite irrelevant when you put it in the context of mining centralization. A few people have put out that, our mining pool, the mining landscape at the moment is dominated by 3-4 groups. I think 4 groups have 75% of the hash rate in the network at the moment. And whether or not a change like this comes into place, whether it does, whether it doesn't, the reality is, because of mining centralization, we're going to see that miners are going to be able to dictate some of these things more so than the rest of the consensus network. So I think the conversation needs to be focusing more on that side of things, about mining centralization as a larger problem to be discussed than simply this op return change.
Yeah,
I suspect that I suspect some of that might self-heal, in the sense that I think a lot of miners out there are feeling the pinch in the cost of mining Bitcoin, and I would like to see greater decentralization of mining, not just from the major pools, but more individuals getting involved, not necessarily trying to run, S19s, 21XPs, etc. at home, those that are guzzling up Australian cost of electricity, but
Our precious
globally-
electricity.
Yeah, right. But rather just overall, if just more individuals sort of looking at what their capacity is to help decentralize block reduction. Overall.
Yeah, and another interesting statistic I read just before we started recording, which I wasn't aware of. So I was looking into this mining centralization. I also read that apparently that percentage of US based mining is now over 70%, which is crazy because the last time we had that much centralization was probably China back in 2016 when they brought in their mining ban. China had more than 50% of the hash rate, and that was considered a huge risk. It's like, we've got the majority of the hash rate is concentrated in a single country, and so there was a bit of relief and rejoice when that ban came through, and then mining started to spread out into various other countries. Fast forward to 2025, suddenly we've got 70% of mining hash rate in the US, at least if that stat I read could be believed. So feel free to fact check me on that. But what happens if Trump, if all the liberal fear mongering stuff comes true and Trump turns massive dictator and decides to seize power of the mining companies that are centralized in the US and start to bring in his own rules.
Well, that's what we're doing, man. We're making all the Bitcoin in America now, and because the large amount of communique comes from the US, it doesn't really get as much bandwidth as it otherwise ought to, perhaps. But I mean, Bayani, you're doing your bit. You're contributing by selling bit axes through shopbitcoin.com.au. I'll give that a little shout out.
Thanks for the plug.
That's good. I wanted to just bring this into land and wrap it up a little bit. First of all, I wanted to give a shout out to Lockie down at Surf Coast Bitcoin, who held the Regional Bitcoin Education Day on the same day as the election. So that would have been handy for any Bitcoiners in the area that were just not interested in the democracy sausage they could have got down to the Regional Bitcoin Education Day. And I'm pretty sure he was handing out some easy Bitcoin books by HardBlock, which was nice to see. And I hope that he has another one of those events. And if you do have a Bitcoin event or a Bitcoin meetup or something that you'd like to broadcast to the listeners of the Australian Bitcoin podcast, shoot us an email, info@australianbitcoinpodcast.com. Otherwise, you can send us like a tweet or a boost or something like that on Fountain, Nostr, whatever, and we'll get that message relayed in future episodes. The last thing I wanted to mention was we ran a really quick, short, sharp competition this week where we needed to find a name for our new Australian Bitcoin podcast mascot. And I put out a tweet, or HardBlock put out a tweet. If you can come up with an appropriate name for the echidna, we'll zap you 5,000 sats, with the caveat that Edna, Edward, Eric, or Echidna McEchidna Face, much to Bayani's chagrin, will not be accepted. So all of the plebs in Australia, they did their best, man. We had Dale Warburton, host of Why Bitcoin. He contributed a fairly controversial one, Albo, and I tried to remain fairly neutral. We had Mudge from Mudge under NW Queensland with Digger. Tyler Green, Libertarian candidate in South Australia. Errol, Flynn, Spike, Quill, and cheekily he said Spikey McSpikeface. I liked that. We had Marcus Monotream, Maxi Miner, Eddie, Spike, Swala. Shout out to Swala for that one. That was decent. Freeman, Pricky, Bip, Satna the Echidna. Not sure about that one. Anyway, there was a bunch of them submitted, and the Australian plebs did their best to name our new mascot for the Australian Bitcoin podcast. We chatted amongst ourselves, and to be quite frank, none of the team liked any of the suggestions. So, with that in mind, we kept the 5,000 sats, but one of the things that was triggered was that Max reminded me of Max Verstappen, And then it made me think of Oscar. Oscar Piastri, our boy. The Orange Australian Grand Prix winner. So we're just going to call it the Echidna Oscar. And we're going to keep the 5,000 sats. So do better.
We'll have to think of another competition at some point where hopefully the plebs can win some sats.
I think so.
They didn't hold up this time round.
Less cringe, huh? So I'm going to bring this in. Looks like we lost Bayani right at the death there, which is unfortunate. So if you're listening all the way to the end, Bayani, thanks for coming on, mate. We appreciate your insight.
Thanks, Bayani.
He must have got enamored by the Sydney Harbour Bridge and just decided to jump off the call. So fair play to him. Anyway, just wanted to say thanks to everyone for listening, and jump on to hardblock.com.au to stack some more sats, DCA. We've got lightning withdrawals, and we're basically the best Bitcoin only exchange in Australia, the longest running, certainly. Anyway, thanks for your time, Mike, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks for another episode, Stream Bitcoin
No
Podcast.
worries. All good. See you next time.